Loud.
Water.
Okay.
Oh boy. Got it.
And
You guys look great. You're front and center of the camera. It's like you guys do these interviews all around the world for big
Mhm.
bucks. Is that what's
Well,
going on?
well, I've got a degree in television production. I know how to line it up and get the color temperatures right so that we don't look like something out of The Walking Dead.
Well, good job. You guys look great. And this is a lot of fun. And why don't you just, who are you guys? Who do you claim to be?
Well, we're a couple of outdoor sports journalists, fishing, camping, wild edibles, who stumbled onto something and said, huh? Hey. And we have spent the last 15 years digging into it. At this point, I think I can class myself as a research historian because I've put 17 years into it. And Mark does, I do pre-Columbian, Mark does post-Columbian. And we are covering the same thing, which is basically world exploration by Ming China and what they call the treasure fleet.
What a big, big subject and a very exciting, important one that I'm just so glad you guys are here. So, Mark, what do you have to say? Identify yourself.
Well, I'm Mark Nickless. I'm a retired special education teacher, and I'm tired because I went fishing yesterday and drove several hundred miles and walked several miles on bad knees. But I caught 6 trout and a bass and saw a bunch of other fish, so it was good to get out. Let's see, our topic, more specifically than Ming Treasure Fleet, was that we got this started in 2005, uncovering evidence that the Chinese had been in the Mississippi Valley and had left a monumental carving on a rock over the Mississippi River near St. Louis that's known as the Pious Saw, which had been turned into a silly local legend about birds eating Indians. But that's, be that as it may, we thought it was more serious, started researching it and concluded it was of Chinese origin, and discovered that, well, actually 2 different researchers had concluded that before, early 20th rather, and late 19th century had come to the same conclusion. But I think we had more evidence than them. Anyway, amongst fishing articles, I wrote 500 words on why I thought the Pious Saw monument was of Chinese origin. And my editor at Outdoor Guide magazine is a friend, Bob Whitehead. He printed it, and he put a little note on there that he thought this would amount to something important someday. Anyway, it gets really convoluted, but eventually the issue with the Pious article made it into the hands of the son of a Chinese official who was going to Washington U, and he ended up calling us cold turkey and saying, this is really important. I think you found something. There's the 600th anniversary, the first sailing of the Chinese Ming fleet is coming up here in a few months. I think you should write a full research paper. And I'm just out of the blue, but okay, we'll give it a try. So wrote a research paper. Do you want to continue, or you want me to continue?
Well, this
Good
guy
job, Mark.
thought our editor wouldn't publish it. And I said, he does strange local stuff. I said, go for it. And it's eaten our life ever since.
Yeah, since 2004 or 5, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, wrote a paper. Somehow we ended up in Nanjing, China, in front of TV cameras. It was the craziest thing I ever saw. I was so exhausted, I couldn't be silly. So I read the paper straight and properly, and then waited every few seconds for it to get translated into Chinese.
On the fly.
And didn't understand a word of Chinese. It was just all new to us. But evidently it was successful. we were coming back, what was it, LA on an airline, and there was a young couple, just Chinese couple, just gotten married. And they started talking about this, this deal in Nanjing where these researchers had spoken about the Chinese discovering America. And he said the people are excited all over Nanjing, which is a city of many millions of people. And he said, you know, if they'd asked for it, they could have had the keys to the city. And we didn't know anything about that. We just said, that was us. We didn't know what was going on outside our little bubble, which was just giving the presentation, going back to the hotel and collapsing. But we caused a stir. No.
About all we knew was how to count to 10. Please, thank you. Yes, no, and I don't understand.
Mhm.
Okay, well, great start. So when you wrote that article, had you guys already started deciphering the imperial text, or was that after?
That was later. It's like, okay, you get home, there's this big letdown, you've done something. What do you do for an encore? What do you do to continue the work?
He says to me, what do we do next? I say, whatever comes and whatever follows.
Mhm.
And so he gets a book on the subject.
And there was, what was it? When China ruled the seas or something like that was the name of it. Anyway, there was a section there about a voyage by the Ming fleet, which sounded promising. I thought, this sounds interesting because they're sailing west. And then all of a sudden they say, well, no, this is not literal. This is just kind of make believe fantasy for the rest of the book. But it has them crossing the ocean. And then they, what is it? The scout Wang Ming comes into a very interesting city. And you want to describe what he saw there? That's yours.
What happened was I picked up the book that he'd gotten and I said, well, where am I going to start? Well, I'll look at the chick chapter. And it was The Sultan's Bride was what the chapter called. And I started flipping through and I saw something that made me go totally incoherent. I just started screaming and I couldn't even put it into words. I was so excited because when you run something through Google Translate, how goony it can come out. Well, there was this section that sounded about that bad. And I said, I was so excited because here's this very old text, badly translated. And I said, this sounds like a powwow. And I go in and I said, oh, we sent word literally around the world saying, hey, there's this, we need to see the original because we need to prove if this is or isn't what sounds like a description of Cahokia. And it just, everything about it sounded like things that I had heard about the Mississippians, the people of the mound builders in the American Midwest. And about 6 months later, the book was put into our hands and I started translating titles and I looked for one that started where everybody agreed that was the last thing they knew for certain that this explorer had done, which is go on Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. And I started from there and I worked my way to the end. And I literally found down to the square foot descriptions of the city that I would find out not long later, my ancestors said they built, which is Cahokia. A mound complex in Illinois, just in sight of the St. Louis Arch. And this Wang Ming walked in there and everything sounded like home, sounded like things I knew about Native American culture. And what's funny is I went to a theme park that had a World Fest and I took a bunch of pictures and the pages just to see if what I thought I saw was what I saw. And the man, I said, is this? And I pointed kind of vaguely at all the pictures, this. And he went through and he said, this is this, this is this. And exactly what I thought. It was an exact description that matched all of these pictures of artwork and pictures of
cuts.
Osage and hairstyles and the mound complex. It was it, just point by point by point. I had found it.
Okay, and so tell me about this imperial text, the author, why nobody else in the world had deciphered this.
Well, he didn't really know so much what he was looking at. At the end of the book, they talk about, well, this is going to be such an embarrassment to the emperor that it wipes out his mandate to be emperor from heaven. So, okay, well, what are we going to, we'll burn all the ships, we'll outlaw anybody doing one of these again, and we'll burn all copies of the records except one and seal it for 150 years. So by the time they unsealed these and somebody had access to these and the guy decided, well, hey, this will make a great story to publish, make me a bunch of money. He had nobody to talk to. And the words were so bizarre and so completely outside of what anybody had any point of reference on, that it sounded like descriptions of the Buddhist underworld. I mean, there were people doing human sacrifice. There were racks of human heads and hands. There were very strange people doing things that sound a lot like the Sundance that you see in the Northwestern Plains. And
You had the
people with fangs. And we know that the Mississippians would wear decorative tooth caps that made them look like they had fangs. They would sharpen their teeth. It sounds a lot like the Ferengi out of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but they literally did it and did a lot of very strange body art and so forth. And everybody knew that the Chinese had not gotten into the Atlantic. They couldn't have gotten here. Oh, that wasn't possible. And so Europeans coming into North America would not find out about Cahokia existing the book was published in 1587 after 1435 was when the guys had gotten home. Sorry, my battery is saying it's charged. But like I said, everybody who'd been on the voyages was dead and gone. No personal records. And so this guy was just trying to figure it out through the filter of what he knew, and he had no frame of reference to compare this to. So it just sounded like creepy, scary monsters.
Okay, some examples of that. Okay, like the book talks about, what was it? Fat black worms that rattle like insects.
They buzz.
That were deadly poisonous. They kept them in a pit and they handled them with gloves. Makes
and
no
wore
sense.
Extreme heavy leather armor to protect themselves.
But if you know that's a good description of a Massasauga rattlesnake, then all of a sudden it makes sense. There was another one, the copper gold bronze snake that had a bite of iron and bit somebody but didn't kill them. It just made them very sick. That's a good description of a copperhead. Talks about fields of purple broomcorn or millet. Whoever heard of giant purple grain? Well, that makes perfect sense if you know that Indian corn was purple. So you had to know Native American culture or have a handle on it to sort out a lot of what they were talking about. Another example would be the dread sun lord that lived on top of the man-made mountain.
Was only one way up the mountain or one way down the mountain.
That's Monk's Mountain, Cahokia, precisely.
Yeah.
And that was all unknown to the Chinese. They had no idea what any of this was about. So of course the book did not make sense, and they just thought the last part of it was some kind of a fantasy, though the first part of the book is history. But once they crossed the ocean and go into the fog, I guess it was the fog of mystery or something. Actually, it was the fog of the North Atlantic near Canada. But again, you had to have knowledge on this side of the ocean. You have to have knowledge of America and the geography and the native peoples there. And then all of a sudden, all this stuff just falls click, 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 click into place and makes sense. Another example, a really good example would be back in the 50s, some researchers found a strange petroglyph in Jefferson County, Missouri, near our home. It's really cool. And it's right on the main route between Cahokia and the Iron Mountains in southern Missouri. And this petroglyph, these researchers thought it was some sort of Ogham or European or North African language or something. But we got a copy, a picture of it, and it says sharing love or peaceful together in Chinese. Any Chinese can read it, and it shows up on an Indian trail south of Cahokia. Interesting.
This is an area where there were earthworks from the Civil War era, but there is no record of any Chinese persons involved in that encampment in that area. There's no record of them in that area at all that is modern. And in the book, there's mention of a mountain made of just magnetite and a whole mountain range of this. And this is fantastical. It doesn't exist anywhere until you go to southern Missouri into Iron County. And then you have Iron Mountain, which was a major battle location for the Civil War because they were trying to control who had those iron reserves. And there's just iron littering the creeks in the area. And this is mentioned in the book. There's a magistrate in the book who's referred to as Jade Two-Piece Necklace. And you know, you'd have to have a culture that had access to jade, and we know that there was jade trade, a jade trade, as well as cacao. And there's mention of it. A man that made the chocolate beverage for the great sun, the god Sheath, who lived at the top of the man-made mountain. And all of these things come together to a culture that interacted with Mesoamerica, that was Mesoamerican, just a lot farther north. We found out since then, as far north as what's called Dixon Mounds, way up in Illinois, there is evidence that has been proven as not accidental contamination, but chocolate residue in things that came straight out of trash pits.
We need to mention something. We need to backtrack a bit. We keep talking about the book, okay? But the name of the book is in English, is The Western World Voyages of the Sanbao Eunuch by Luo Mao Dong. Sanbao Eunuch is Zheng He, which you see sometimes in TV documentaries and such. Also, what is it? The most powerful ship in Star Trek Starfleet now is the Zheng He, though Riker pronounced it the Jing He. We just wanted to go, but okay.
That urge to reach through the TV set, grab the person, squeeze their throat, and say, "That is not how you say that."
Yeah. And the book, we got it through the help, it turns out, of Admiral Zheng Ming, who was related to Zheng He. He's in the same family. So he was looking out after his ancestors, making sure we got this material so we could sort it out. That's very important. Okay, just some background. It's The Western World Voyages of the Sanbao Eunuch by Luo Mao Dong. Luo Mao Dong seems to be familiar with some of the inner workings of the imperial palace. So we suspect he was an official or maybe royalty of some sort, but he had inside knowledge of the palace and the way it worked that would be unavailable to outsiders.
Well, there's a very long, what you would term a panoramic painting, and it's called Procession to the Ming Tombs. And he talks about a procession in the first couple of chapters of the book that is straight out of that painting, that talks about the different groups of the court using animal metaphors. figuratively describing each section of the court, each part, the women, the men, the people of this functionary duty and that. It's really wild. But the more I'm currently looking at the first 19 chapters just to see how they got to the point they came out. And I'm starting to see that there was, well, we know from later that there was definitely some people who had been basically marooned because there had been a 10-year stop in the voyages. And so you had people who were picked up in the 1420s that when the emperor who started the voyages died, his son said, well, we're going to put a pause on this. And then his grandson restarted them about 10 years later. And there are people who are described very, very strangely until you start realizing that these aren't monsters. These are weird people of an extremely different culture from what the Chinese understood, such as extreme tattooing, body modification, and that these people were not demons or monsters. They were just weird because they were so not Chinese. They were so Mesoamerican. They were so completely different that they were incomprehensible to the Chinese.
Okay.
So, Mark, do you have something?
I was going to say next question.
Okay. So, there's so many topics out there where, it doesn't follow the narrative and it's kept from the masses type thing. The list is so long, it's just unbelievable. So you guys are saying that this hero, one of China's greatest heroes, Admiral Zheng He, in the 1400s, came to America. You're going to tell us about that journey and the voyage. The issue is that I just bid on a coin on eBay that was produced in 2020. It was 2 ounces of silver, and it's got Zheng He there. And on the back side in the description, it clearly states that he only traveled around the Indian Ocean and around, and it shows his thing. So what you guys are saying is just a massive, massive revision to everything that the world thinks about Zheng He traveling. And just how do you guys respond to that?
The records were burned. Okay. So they say, well, he got as far as Africa. Any record to the contrary, they've all been burned. We know, what was it? There was a court eunuch who burned them. I could look it up, but it was several decades later. Everything was destroyed because the voyage to America ended in a disaster for the Chinese and the natives. So they
An
had to
extreme
cover
embarrassment.
it was an embarrassment, and it threatened the emperor's right to rule.
Okay. One of the rules of the Mandate of Heaven was you do not behave like the Yan using bioterror weaponry to genocidally attack someone who had not attacked you first. And oops. And the descriptions I started to find as I got into a section that talked about court cases were that person after person that will be coming into contact with the Chinese explorers had a problem. Type A blood type has a 30% extreme response rate to a contagion. I was finding descriptions of smallpox. 30% would disrupt your social structure, discredit your religious leadership, and so forth, which kind of works. I wouldn't do it myself. I think it's a bit over problematic, but they weren't working. They weren't unleashing this on a population that was going to have a 30% fatality rate. Native American populations that have not previously had contact with this contagion have a 96% fatality rate if they're lucky.
Sometimes 100.
They were showing signs of this, of what's called the hemorrhagic form of this contagion. They brought smallpox to my ancestors in Cahokia. They stripped the area within a couple of weeks' time of more than 96% of the population. They were showing the 100% fatality rate. We have found, and it's in our second book, I mean, it's in our main book, which is this, Chasing Dragons. We have included a foundational oral history from the Osage, my ancestors, about them coming into a village where the ground is covered with the dead and the dying. I mean, they literally, there was not living to bury the dead. The smallpox had been so extreme. There's a reason why people live in fear of smallpox coming out of a lab. There's a reason why there was some very strong reactions with COVID about, and there still are, about making sure that everybody gets their inoculations and all of this stuff, because we don't need another, we don't need, it's too much. It's too much to see this kind of mass death. And they knew that the emperor, I mean, there was also a cometary impact in the ocean, wiped out 80% of the Chinese fleet in the Pacific Ocean at the same time. And all of this was saying, the gods are peeved. You have screwed up. You messed with these people who did not attack you. You can't do that. And the emperor said, well, we'll just not tell anybody we did. And we'll just bury it, because I can do that. And then I get to sit on my throne and everybody lives happily ever after, especially me. And I'm what matters. He said,
there was a very clear focus on inward to China right after this happened, right?
Yeah.
well, they made it a capital offense to build a ship of the size and class of the major ships of the Chinese fleet. The phone's ringing. Mark will take care of that.
No,
But it was,
I'll give you the Samantha.
they shut things down because they were not, hit it again,
I hit talk.
hit talk again.
Hello?
Kit, Sammy's got the phone. But
Hello?
It's okay.
it's,
Yeah, I just clicked the button by accident. Get out of it.
but
Okay,
it
we're
was,
under
it was a
control now.
matter of that they, the powers that be wanted to remain the powers that be. It was such an embarrassment that they made it an offense to teach a foreign language, to learn a foreign language, or to teach Chinese to an outsider. They wanted China closed off so entirely.
And so let me just jump in, and then Mark, you can jump in, but there was, a huge, a huge desire to spread tribute and to go around the world with your ships that are the size of football fields, 300 feet, 400 feet, and spread tribute as a power thing, that we have power over you, but you give us a little something back. And all that exploration, all of that stopped kind of in this 1430s time period. And that's where you were at right before this.
Well, China had gold. China had silk. China had spices. China had everything China wanted and could possibly desire, except, and China found a culture that had so much of it and didn't use it. Therefore, disrupting these guys who were eating the neighbors. So they were Uki and should be converted to be good Buddhists and Taoists and stop eating the neighbors, no matter how flattering they thought that was. I am joking and I am telling the truth at the same time here. Ritual cannibalism. Hey, the ancestors did it. I'm glad we've stopped since then. But they decided it's a lot like us going into Iraq. Well, they'll throw flowers at us and give us all the oil that we could possibly want. They said, well, we'll go in, we'll disrupt this government and social system and religious system that surely they're not crazy about, and they'll just throw flowers at us and give us all the iron we could desire. I told you about those mountains of magnetite. It's the largest freestanding body of almost laboratory pure iron in the world.
Yeah.
And the Chinese said, we can go in there and we will have our budding military industrial base will go crazy and we won't have to do diddly. We'll just run everything. Because we got gunpowder and we'll have the guns and everybody will just say, you're the boss, just tell us what to do.
Okay.
And instead, they destroyed everything and embarrassed themselves so completely that they didn't dare even tell themselves what they'd done.
Well, that's where the returned sailors from the fleet were all settled in a little village. Supposedly it's due to loyalty to the admiral, but it may have just simply been, it was a good way of keeping them quiet. They all lived together in a little place that could be controlled. Okay, now I did some research a while back. The Chinese shortage of iron was such that at one time during the Ming Dynasty, it took several years, 2 or 3 years worth of labor, man years of labor to produce 1 ton of iron. Time you did your mining and your refining, you had to cut down trees or get coal or something. It took 2 or 3 years of work equivalent to produce 1 ton of iron. In America, where this iron came from, we've done it. You can go down to certain streams in that area and pick up chunks of magnetite, where in the past as a demonstration,
It's
to sell
so
the
pure.
proposition, they just put it in a forge and start hammering it back in the 1800s.
No
and produce
refining
tools.
necessary.
Just completely different. It saved incredible amount of work. To get back to your original question, which was how come they only sailed as far as Africa? Well, like I said, it's the records were burned. There's no the records were burned. Okay. The second point is, it makes no sense to say that that's as far as Zheng He went, because the Chinese had been going to the west coast of Africa for centuries. Why would you be all excited about building this giant fleet of exploration and then just going no farther than where you went all the time anyway? It makes no
I think you mean
sense.
East Coast,
Did I say west coast? If I said west coast, I do mean east coast of Africa.
Mhm.
which is just across the Indian Ocean from India.
Mhm. So you didn't need that big fleet to go there. It doesn't make any sense to build that fleet unless you're going to use it. And these were ocean going ships. You had each treasure ship or Baochuan was basically the equivalent of an aircraft carrier, and you had smaller auxiliary ships that was in that group. So basically you had carrier groups under various admirals going to various places in the world. And they did map it. We know that the entire world was mapped before Columbus. The international cartographers have admitted that after publishing a paper by S.L. Lee, who analyzed the 1602 Ricci map, which was the first European map out of China. It has pre-1430 sources for much of the information. You can date it according to the name changes of various places under various emperors. They know that much of the material is pre-1430. Yes, yet it is a world map. Okay.
The PBS Globe.
Okay, yeah, there's a globe. It was on PBS a while back, Secrets of the Dead. It was about Magellan being the first person to go around the world. But right up front, they showed a German globe that was 5 years previous to Magellan's voyage. And the globe showed the west coast of South America and the southern tip of South America, which is utterly impossible unless somebody had already been there. But they showed it and they just glossed right over it and ignored the fact that it means somebody else had to be there. And the only people that had the technology to do that were the Chinese. So right off the bat, they've admitted without saying so that the Chinese were there first. And then they went on for the better part of an hour talking about how Magellan went around the world. In fact, he died halfway through. But, it's legend more than history.
Yeah.
So
Fairy tales.
Yeah, we know that somebody mapped the West Coast. That and there's just evidence all over the world for the Chinese. You mentioned Zheng He. Now, he was in America. He is in the book described as being in America. I mentioned Dr. S.L. Lee a few seconds ago. He is in possession of a bronze medallion that was found in North Carolina. Asheville, North Carolina, some years ago. It's been on TV several times, even with William Shatner, so it's not an unknown quantity. And it said that the bearer represents the Emperor Xuandi, which was the emperor in question who was in charge at the time. There's a defect on the back of the medallion.
There's more than one defect.
Yes. Anyway, it's in the book that Laurie has translated. It's all described. It was found in the United States. It's been on televisions. There's no way to get around that. It came from the Chinese and it ended up in America before Columbus, just along the shore.
But the thing is, it has been debunked because it's such a bad casting of bronze. It's so poorly mixed. The back of it is rough. And well, let's put it this way. It was such a bad job that it's described in the book as the guy who made it was executed for screwing up. They put the wrong thing on the back and they ground it off and they said, well, we'll make another one as we're traveling. And apparently they were busy and never got around to it. And he just simply carried that one the whole time. And then in the last chapter of the book, Xuandi says, well, okay, all fine and good. Now give me the medallion. That was the badge of office, his credentials. And there's a problem with people they translate it one way. They say, well, the two commanders, the word, I look at all possible translations of a word. And the word there was not two commanders, but the second commander, the second in command, the vice admiral, said to him, well, it's not that. And they said, well, we will declare him viceroy of this place and just make him viceroy in perpetuity. And then they say, well, they built a memorial temple. And they didn't build a memorial temple. There are two types of memorials. And you see them today, even. Somebody will do something in memorial to a living person or a dead person. And the descriptions for what they say they did is that it was for a living person, not a dead person. So they had left a living person in this far place, not a dead one. And two leaders of the fleet had stayed behind, a religious leader and another leader. And this guy is mentioned later as, well, he was asked to come to the Imperial Palace and he said, well, I'm still busy with what I'm doing. And in the book, he stayed. And so you have this outside kind of weird confirmation that he didn't go back either. And he was another person who was given a living memorial temple in honor of someone who was not dead. And so the two of them would have spent the remainder of their lives trying to, as he says in chapter 98, he said, I know how to balance the two burdens of my heart, one of which would be to his duty to the emperor, but the other was the duty to his men. They had put out 23 units of explorers, mappers, missionaries, diplomats to go all over the Americas. 5 of them made it back to the rendezvous point. One of them went off up a river after they made it to the rendezvous point. He didn't want to leave without his men. He would not abandon his men, and he stayed. And he's not mentioned directly in any of the rest of the book, except for that, well, we'll just make him viceroy of this place forever. And
so
Okay.
go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say there's an interesting twist to that. Okay, so the medallion was found in the Southeast United States. Now, in the Southeast about that time, you have some Buddhist symbolism shows up. Eye in hand.
it's usually shown this
And
way.
even the links of the fingers have meanings, as SLE
Yeah.
pointed out.
They
But
are,
you do have some Buddhist
Mhm.
iconography show up in just the area where he would have gone.
yeah.
Interesting.
Very good.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you take this symbol and you turn it this way, it starts looking like something else. And one of the things that they were told to be following, remember I talked about that cometary impact in the Pacific? They were supposed to be following the comet. And as you could see, what was an eye in the hand, when it turns this way, starts looking awful lot like a comet.
With a tail.
With tail included. So it was one in both. And
That'd be Toscanelli's comet, which is documented in Europe. That was likely
Yes.
the comet in question.
but there was a huge amount of weather changes. There were crop failures. There were extreme winters for a couple of 100 years after that. So, again, here was another thing. The gods were ticked off. And China closed its gates because they didn't want the rest of the world to find out what they'd done. And they didn't want China to find out from the rest of the world what they'd done. And for 400 years, they protected the imperial monarchy by, we do not speak of this to outsiders kind of behavior.
And so how are you guys received in China? You've gone there a few times to give speeches. You've definitely been honored, respected, spoken between some important presidents around the world. So what does China think? I mean, it's my understanding that they don't like to be told what their history is by anybody. Is that not true?
I would say the opposite.
I-
They seem to be very
well,
excited.
They don't like to not be. They don't like to be lied to. And this really shows how the imperial system focused too much power into the hands of one or two people. And also, Aurochs was, and they won't embarrass their own ancestors, but they will let someone speak who, as is said, their ox has been gored. And there's another special thing. Now, I talked about 5 units of explorers made it to be debriefed. One group under one commander said, the commander said, I can't stop yet. I haven't finished mapping. I need to go up this one really muddy river over here off this way. Go up here, and when I get there, I'll probably at the headwaters of this super river that's so much like the Yangtze. Clearly the headwaters of the Yangtze join with one end of the river of the Han, and this will join with the other end of the river of the Han, and we'll just sail across it and get home. Okay, what is the river of the Han? The river of the Han is the Milky Way. They expected to take a shortcut to China if they went that direction. They were told, don't dawdle, you'll get left. DNA studies of the people of the Northern Plains, the Native American peoples, have shown that they and their horses have a recent influx of Mongol DNA. Their horses have more Mongol pony DNA than Spanish horse DNA. The number of horses were so extreme that by the time the Spanish got there, horses were in the thousands, the hundreds of thousands, and everybody was riding. The majority of the units of explorers was Mongol cavalry. They were riding Mongol horses because they were tough, they were durable, they were small, they were easy to, pack up on a ship and travel with. And I'm part Blackfoot. My ancestors, my daughter's DNA shows that we have a whole lot of Mongol. My family, apparently the guys dawdled and grandma was a looker. And they settled down, and there's a reason why those cowboy and Indian movies look a lot like movies about Genghis Khan, because grandpa taught us all how to ride the same way. And so now if I go to China, they greet me as a daughter of the fleet. I am both sides of the story. I'm intimidated. I'm so intimidated by this. But my DNA says that I'm the meeting between the two cultures. 600 years later, I found my family. I went looking for Sinbad, the San Bao, the basis of those stories of Sinbad. I went looking for Sinbad and I found myself. My mind was completely blown. I broke down in tears when I found out. Because after 600 years, I was the first member of my family to go home after we got left. I was taking them home for the first time in me. And China respects that. They said there will be people who wait at the city gate, but they'll get bored and they'll forget about these guys and they'll just go on about their ways. They haven't forgotten that they left us. And I can say us. And Mark can say us. And we were the first children of the fleet from Feng Tu to come home in 600 years and know we were coming home.
Well, the world's extremely lucky and grateful for your work, you guys, and just amazing how it starts with, Mark's article, right? Laurie, did you help with that initial article?
Well, I told him go for it.
It's
It
amazing.
wasn't fishing, but I went ahead and did it anyway.
I said, he'll run it. He runs crazy stuff every so often. Go for it.
Let me tell you guys, I listened to, there were 3 conferences this weekend online. I somehow tried to listen to what this, he's I believe a PhD. He's a professor at one of the UC schools. And what did he say? He said, a guy was talking, he's like, I'm not a, academically trained person. And what did this professor spit out? He said, oh, that's good that you're liberated. And so it's a very subconscious, funny little comment that meant a lot to me. And I've told a lot of people, then you're liberated, because I asked one question and it was such a softball question and they didn't ask it. And the question about all this rock art in the West Coast, wherever, and my question was so gentle. It was so gentle. It said, have you noticed any similarities with Asiatic cultures? Like just any of these. It was such a simple question, worthy of being asked. And I recorded it. And this guy got so nervous. And he's like, looking at the questions, he's like, and moving on, no more questions. And then he's like, go ahead, Ken. I mean, it was like the strangest thing I've ever heard. And so to hear him later say that you're liberated to this other person, I was like, you don't understand how telling that comment is. These people cannot say certain things or
Yes.
they'll be fired. I mean, it's just a
Okay.
fact.
Let me tell a little story here. So I, in innocent excitement, contacted the author of that book that I found the section in. And I said, oh, have you checked into what the original language said? Have you had somebody Chinese look at it? And she went, and the term is postal. She went like postal times a Googleplex. She did the ultimate academic threat. Who do you work for? So she could get my grants pulled, so she could get my, she could force my grad students to repudiate me and, nuke my tenure and blah, blah, blah. Well, we have something that academicians don't have. We have nothing to lose. And therefore, as journalists, one, we can dig outside our own sandbox and be interdisciplinary scholars because we ask impertinent questions of everybody. We don't stick to our discipline, which apparently keeps archaeobotanists, archaeoastronomers, and archaeologists from talking to each other. And they don't talk to the tribes. No, they pollute their findings. But when she found out I didn't work for anybody, she was getting so threatening and so nasty that I included every person I thought would be worthy of hearing this discussion into the message string. And she emailed every single one of them and basically declared me Voldemort. Don't even admit she was ever born. Don't mention her name again. Cut her out of any emails you could ever send or receive from her ever again. And I'm going, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. But I've had people go, oh, well, I heard she was just a housewife about me. I've put in 15 years. I've done enough work. I've had people say this is doctoral level work. Somebody should hand me a PhD because it won't be honorary. I've earned it by systematically using scientific method to go through and verify every single thing in a way that someone else can look at my method and confirm or disprove what I did by following my paper trail.
Okay.
And they just want to take what somebody before them said about what somebody before them said about what it starts sounding like Talmudic studies, not history. Nobody wants to quote the original material. They just want a quote of 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 a quote, which is the way rabbinical students do. It's not scientific. It doesn't make sense.
So, Mark,
it doesn't work.
do you have something, Mark, or may I continue?
Yeah, I'm thinking one comment, back that up. What we have found is that you get into archaeology and history, especially American history, before it's a cult. I don't know anything. It's a religious cult. You have to, and I read papers all the time.
Thou shalt not spout heresy to manifest destiny and the myth of the dying savage.
Yeah.
Okay.
And replacing these fading, decadent cultures that were just dying out anyway, and we elevated them.
Okay, you can't, it's just where you can't get through to them. It's Columbus discovered America. That's all there is to it. The other half of it is that Indians were stupid and they didn't do much anything except just sit here and fight. It's racist.
Oh, they can't have had advanced astronomy. No. I'm not sure why all of their ceremonial complexes are all set up according to the positions of stars in the sky overhead at the summer and winter solstice or equinox. But oh my goodness, you can't mention that. No. They can't have astronomy. And oh, don't mention that they discovered zero. Don't mention that Columbus said he had maps. He was just doing that to shut his men up.
Okay, another point too is she's talking about a translation. Her translation has been examined by a number of scholars beginning in 2019 at Surabaya when we spoke in Surabaya. They were very
College
excited.
professors.
Yeah. Later, Huawei Li, who was once the head of the Asian division of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., carefully read her material and said he was amazed at how good the translation was. He could not believe that a non-Chinese
He asked
could
where I'd
do-
studied.
he could do such a good job. But again, the reason she could do such a good job on some of this material was because coming from America instead of China, she understood the references, the snakes and the pyramids and the
Well,
sun lords
we
and
were
the jade.
outdoor writers. We knew about the animals, about the plants, about the local landmarks and historical sites like Cahokia. And like I said, and we're both part Native American. So we looked at this stuff and we said, oh, I said, well, okay, I'm going to go off topic. One of the first electronic translators, they tried it out with a figure of speech. They took this figure of speech that everybody knew and put it into Japanese. And they took what they got in Japanese and put it back into English to see what it would happen. Well, the phrase they got back was invisible, insane. The original phrase had been out of sight, out of mind. You can see how it got there, but they don't have any relation to each other. When I looked in the translation I found in that one book, I said, they're saying people with horses' heads. Could it be like that goofy screw up of somebody just didn't have a good dictionary? Is horses' heads like a horse hairstyle? And when I got into the text and I found that scene, it was a hairstyle like a horse's mane. It wasn't just head, it was hairstyle. It was not just head, where they said cow's head, it was a cow headdress. So I was looking at basically a mohawk or what's called a roach. I was looking at a buffalo headdress and I said, that's it. And that's what I took to the gentleman. And you can see this piece of calligraphy on the wall behind me. I bought it as a thank you to the man for confirming that I knew what I was talking about. And I went from there.
Okay. Next question.
Okay. So what's interesting about the iron is a big part of the Ancient Artifact Preservation Society, where you guys have spoken up in Marquette, Michigan, best conference every year for this type of stuff. They're always talking about the copper. And I guess there is a book, Iron in America, right? There is a few things about iron, but it's just not I always hear about the copper and I don't hear about the iron being extracted. So
copper is easy. Copper can be easily, it's soft. It is malleable. It is
Workable.
You can work it with a campfire. Iron, you have to have a lot more heat. Even if, and they had flint, they had obsidian, they had all kinds of things. They didn't need to go to the trouble. They had better, easier access to tools that they could have instead of the iron. So they just hadn't bothered because they hadn't needed to.
I see. Okay, very good.
Copper was pretty and shiny and they liked to decorate with it. So they did mess with copper.
Yeah.
And I've been learning about the mica that was, I believe, from the Smoky Mountains, right? And that may have been some type of a conductor of electricity, but it lined, it lines some of those rooms there at Cahokia. Is that right, Micah?
Well,
It's decoration.
you look at the story of the 7 cities of gold. They liked to press mica flake into those plaster that they would cover those palisades with. And so if the sun hit it at the right angle, that would have sparkled like it was covered in gold.
Nice.
And so this may be a misinterpretation of what people thought they saw. That these cities of gold were not gold, but they sparkled like it. And that mica probably was what it was.
Also, if you had somebody looking for gold and they were disrupting your town, where's the gold? Where's the gold? You just tell them to go on over the hill to the next town and you get rid of them.
Yeah.
Which is what they did to the Spanish, Oh, just keep going. It's
That
there
way,
somewhere.
over there. Yeah, over
They're out of
there.
your hair then.
All right, well, few more things, and then we'll wrap up part 1. All right, you have to tell the world one of the scariest, craziest, seems to be true stories. I know you don't know what I'm going to say yet, but Fusang is what the Chinese called the West Coast of America, California.
Actually, not just the West Coast.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Fusang is the word for the mulberry tree. If you look at the shape, if you've ever had a mulberry tree and you look at the shape of North America and a mulberry tree, they're the same shape.
Okay.
Roughly that gets into
And the word is Fusang.
That's from 1500 years ago, the Buddhist account of the voyage to America.
During the Song.
And it gives pretty good descriptions of the West Coast all the way into the desert as far as Texas. So, okay, Fusang is the West Coast and the rest of the country. Keep going.
All right, very good. So you're going to have to tell the world Senator Semple and his son and the first governor of Washington. So the point is that there was Chinese people living in the Americas before Columbus, and they were certainly all over the West Coast. And tell us the story of Senator Semple, what his son did, and involving the Piasaw near you guys.
Okay,
Well, let's start with the phrase manifest destiny. The concept of manifest destiny was that it was the manifest destiny of white European settlement to be extended from sea to shining sea and to tame the wilderness of North America and Christianize and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess who was one of the big bubbas on manifest destiny?
Okay, I can take it from here.
And now Mark will go into the post-Columbian section of the story of.
Mark wants to be a TV star. I can see it.
Okay, I had researched the Piasaw, and just from the written records of Marquette in 1673 and others, it really sounded Chinese. Even down to the paint scheme and everything. We found some a picture from the 1840s by an American artist, and he'd published in Germany. But the Piasaw that he painted was this huge carving of animals that was painted up on a bluff, and we found out that later that there's one just like it in China at the Nanjing boat yards. The sailors that came back from America set up a memorial to the voyages. So you have this memorial with 2 dragons, and they're atop a pearl that's sitting on flames. Is what they call a precious pearl, and it's surrounded by flames. The one in China corresponds to the one in the American painting, down to little details. Okay. That was rather incredible. Okay, anyway, this book was published in the 1840s. It was about travels on the Mississippi River. I think Laurie's got the copy here. The Valley of the Mississippi. Okay, by Henry Lewis. Okay, so you got this picture of what it really looks to be Chinese in an American book about something found about the Mississippi Valley. Okay, right after the book came out, Senator Semple, who was again in favor of manifest destiny, bought up the property at the Piasaw site. He bought all the property there. He bought the bluff and everything. Anyway, he set up a real estate company, and he had this really cool deal. It was we're going to show the picture.
I'm going to move this close to the screen. There it
Okay.
is.
Can you see it?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, and it turns out there's another picture which is even better in some ways. But he bought up all the property, had a real estate company. He made a special deal. If you will, there's this horrible Piasaw painting on this bluff
It's
right
an
next to my
eyesore.
it's nice. So right next to my property, if you tear it down, you can use the limestone there. You can burn it and make lime for mortar, or you can knock it down and use it for building material. Okay. And he would give you a free building lot. So for the first couple of years of his real estate development, it's called the Village of Elsa today, ELSAH. All the older buildings are made out of stone. So you start knocking it down. He gives you a building lot. A couple of years later, after the Piasaw was gone, he started selling building lots.
Yes.
Really interesting. So there was something going on there, and the locals wondered why he knocked this down and all that.
Hey, it was a tourist attraction. We could sell, munchies to the folks on the steamboats as they went by. It got people here. We got tourists coming in, staying in our hotel and eating in our cafe. Hey, this makes us money. And then a bunch of new people came through and said, hey, I just want a place to put a house. And they destroyed what other people said made them special.
Also, about that time, there was stories. What was it? Professor Russell is what he styled himself. He turned the Piasaw.
Professor.
He turned the Piasaw into a giant bird that ate Indians and left bodies and skeletons in a cave, and he was killed by a brave Indian chief. It was really bizarre, but it sold magazines. Okay, they even went so far as to change the location of the Piasaw, just make it disappear, and it ended up, the bird version ended up 10 miles south in Alton, Illinois, where there's a picture of it today. Though the old maps,
the bad mutation of the original.
Okay. Though the old maps show Piasaw Bluff and the Piasaw as being in Elsa, that seems to have been collectively forgotten.
Guidebook. You walk into the museum there and you see maps of the town. You get a guidebook in the town, and it says, and that shows the old maps, and the words are Piasaw Bluff.
So okay, so they destroyed it. They created a cover story. They moved the location. Now, what's interesting is Washington Territory, had a large Chinese
Pacific
population.
Northwest.
There was a California official from, I believe, the 1840s or so that said that there's Chinese villages in California that were there before we came, which was interesting. He kind of got forgotten. Anyway, the West Coast had Chinese on it. There's a French map from the 1700s, which calls America Fusang, and it says Fusang of the Chinese, and it shows the Chinese living in the area of Washington and Oregon and southern Canada. So the French knew something. Anyway, this area was organized into the Washington Territory before it became a state. The appointed governor of Washington Territory was Eugene Semple, the son of the Manifest Destiny senator. The only thing he is known for in the history books is his bad treatment of the Chinese.
Oh, they won't assimilate anyway. We just run them off and send them back to China.
So it's okay. It's okay to do nothing. So they had these anti-Chinese.
Just let them beat the snot out of them.
Well, it was worse than that. They were killing Chinese, these rioters, and he refused to do anything. And it got so bad that the U.S. Army intervened to protect the Chinese population, because the governor would do absolutely nothing to protect the Chinese that lived there.
And as soon as it became a state, he got pitched. He was not elected because he was such a problem child. But there is an and about the French. Now, it's not there anymore.
Oh,
But as the Chinese came in overland, they landed in what the descriptions match those of the Cape Breton Island and
in
headlands
Canada.
in the Canadian Maritimes, the extreme East Coast. And they came up a big river and they met what they called the god of mists and thunders with two wings. Now, if you look at the Niagara Falls, there is a big stone section and the falls to either side, two wings. Now, the initial explorers to the area who were doing the initial mapping found something, and the Chinese had left something, and it was a pillar. And I wish I could find photographs of this pillar, but the initial explorers of European ancestry to reach the area said they found a pillar
Tartaric.
with Tartaric, meaning Chinese script. They took it back to Paris. And someday I'm going to get into the records of the Monuments Men and go crazy, or I'm going to get somebody to get into it, because the people who last had it were OCD for record keeping. Now, here's where the twist gets weird. That pillar was in Paris up to a point. Now, I mentioned the Monuments Men because the people who took it were Nazis, and they took it back to Germany with them out of Paris. This pillar, and this pillar would have had a massive amount of the record of who was there, what they were doing there, and their credentials on it. And I have a description in the book of it and where they placed it right there at the foot of Niagara Falls, the god of mists and thunders with two wings, the Canadian and the American Falls. And it disappeared during World War II. The last picture we have of it is being looted by Nazis, like all the other goodies they carried back home with them. Treasures of other places that they decided they had a better right to. So they just simply stole it.
All right, show us your books, and then I'm going to continue these questions for our second session, part 2. And then we'll wrap this up for right now, okay?
Okay.
Well, we're going to show you the ones that are presently available. You need to
Yes.
pull this back
Can
a
I
little
back? Can you
bit.
see it? Okay, Chasing Dragons. That's the expanded edition. I also need to make a third edition because I just keep finding material.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, that's available.
We're-
What Barnes?
We're
and
going to get
Noble?
into next session. We're going to
And
get
John-
into all the evidence that's been
Okay.
found around the Americas. So
And here is my translation. Yeah, it's a monster beast. I'm soon going to be expanding this, and there will be it'll be into 2 parts, which will be Beyond Calicut and then To the Gates of Feng 2 will be the 2 parts. And Beyond Calicut has to do with the fact that Zheng He was said to have gotten sick in the Indian Ocean and died. And I found records of an illness that they said was like unto cholera, which would have been quite fatal. And I think he had food poisoning, and it just, the gossip, the chain of gossip and scuttlebutt what just got used and twisted to say, well, he died. But he would have been sick before time for Hajj, and they said he went on Hajj. So those are mutually exclusive. So he either died before Hajj or he didn't go on Hajj, and there is record verified of him going on Hajj. Everybody agrees he went on Hajj. So he can't have died when they said he died. And I'll start from that illness in the Indian Ocean and go through the rest of the time. They were very, very detailed descriptions of Venice and what's now Saudi Arabia and all of that area in the Mediterranean, and give a lot more foundation there to the European part of the voyages. And then to the gates of Fengtu will, as before, be that from the Canadian Maritimes to the heartland of the upper Mississippi to the end of the story when they return to Nanjing.
All right, so just one last thing, and we'll wrap it up. If Zheng He would be considered one of the top 5 greatest heroes of China, is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
And this further cements his honor, his duty, and his general greatness of character, because he knew that 18 units of explorers had never made it home. 19, if you could include the one, he wouldn't abandon his men. He went down with them. He stayed. And the Chinese are choosing to take pride in a man who would not abandon men under his command because it was inconvenient to wait. He would rather stay and do his last duty to them. And well, if you don't, your mission can only be a failure if you end it. He chose to never end the mission. So how could it be a failure?
And referred to his grandfather by his troops being the ultimate compliment for what they all thought of him. And
Beloved grandpa, basically is what the term means. Yeah, Pappy, Gramps, a loving, affectionate term. A man who had no children treated his men as his children.
And we'll get into that next time, the process of the eunuch. We'll have Mark explain to us the the procedure, and if you could research that, that'd be great, Mark. So
Research what?
the process of Zheng He
Yeah, he
becoming.
may have been Sinbad, but Sinbad
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
dating. He
Okay.
it wasn't that he wasn't into you. He just didn't have it in him anymore.
Okay.
All right, so good
Okay.
job. We're going to share this with everybody immediately, and we'll continue this very soon. Okay, thank you.
Had fun.
It was a lot of fun. Bye, Mark. Bye, Laurie. Thank you. Bye.